Okay, let's move on to our main topic for today. Our main topic is, what does your work day look like? Okay, in the creative industry, especially with many different types of creatives here on the couch today, I'm just very curious how our productivity is similar, how it's different, how we block our days, how we work with each other when we have different styles. So there's a lot to dive into. Let's start with Derek. What does an average work day look like for you?
So for me, I like to get started a little bit earlier, but I'm not very disciplined at it.
Okay.
And that's something I think I'm trying to work on a little bit more. Mark's known me for 7 years, and he's seen the full gamut of me arriving at 10 and then me arriving at 6 and then landing somewhere in the middle around there. But I know that when I start my day earlier, and that it's not to say like I'm starting at 4 a.m. like Steve Jobs did, or that sort of stuff. But the earlier I start my day, the more productive I can feel, because then I can have that protected time. And I'm sure Mark will talk about this too when he talks about his day. But I really learned that from him, in that having those quiet moments to start your day is incredibly valuable, and you should fight for that. But outside of that, after kind of that first half of the morning, it gets a little chaotic.
Yeah.
Particularly working in client services, especially, you just have to be responsive to clients' needs and that sort of stuff, and shifting deadlines and that sort of stuff. And there's a team of 3 of us, so people have feedback and that sort of stuff. But the more you can block it, the better. So I try to block out my day, and then I try to be done, with the majority of my real focusy work by about 4, so I can try to coast into the evening. Just because I'm really not a big fan of taking work home.
Yeah.
In graphic design and any sort of digital industry where you work from your computer, it's very easy to kind of violate that boundary. And so that's another thing that I specifically have tried to work on too, is, when you go home, if you do have to do things, make sure they're very minimal, small things, or things that you enjoy.
That's one thing I've evolved over time. Is I used to, when my kids were really little, I used to save work to do for after they went to bed. And it was like, an 8 to 11 p.m. shift or something. And it caused the most misery that I've probably had in any of my career, is forcing myself to work when I'm tired after a long day and after parenting for a long day. That was misery.
It's like that brain shift, and maybe that's kind of what it is too, is that if you're switching between different things, it becomes lossy. Mark and I talk about that a lot, about switching between tasks, and how lossy that can be. But when you get home and you spend time with your kids, in your example, your mindset's already shifted into spending time with people you love, and then you got to go back to work. It's like kind of doing a whole morning routine over again, where you kind of have to take a deep breath and dive back in. Sometimes it's necessary, but
I used it way too much when I was earlier in my career, and I think it was really, really hard on me.
Yeah.
Mark, talk about your average workday a little bit here.
Mine feels like a giant downhill ramp with a little bump at the end. Little Evil Knievel
little
ramp.
ski jump,
For those
little
of you
ski
who
jump
know
of
who Evil
productivity.
Knievel was.
Can you send me a link?
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. So I like to have a sense of productivity as early as possible, a sense of accomplishment. So I do get up really early, not as early as some, but in the 5 o'clock hour, and try to get to a coffee shop at 6 when they open here. And it's just sketchbook and orchestral scores. And no distractions. So the thing that I've trained myself to do in the past probably 5-6 years is to not look at the emails, not get drowned with somebody else's false sense of urgency, and let that set the tone for my day. Because in creative work, you need as much freedom and as much non-distracted tunnel time as you can get. At least I do. And just being in client services can be very distracting. and even in what we do as creatives, I protect that space in the morning now for a good 2-3 hours, and sometimes longer, so that I can get a lot accomplished. I hit it hard. I focus hard. I don't, every couple hours I take a little break. I get some coffee. I get, a snack or something. And I come back. And then by lunchtime, I feel like this sense of accomplishment is met, which is like 11 for me. And then I kind of take a break. Sometimes I'll, like if we're working remotely, I'll come to the office and we'll go get coffee or whatever. A few of us take a walk, just kind of decompress a little bit. And then when I get home, or as I start kind of round 2, I'll do another session like that where I'll go deep and I will respond to some emails. I'll make some phone calls, whatever I need to do, kind of in the afternoon, the early afternoon, so that nobody's waiting too long. Mm-hmm. But then I just kind of closed, open.
I like how you talk about the change in physical space too. When you're doing different activities, you're starting off productive in one actual physical space. Then when you're opening up your mind and being a little bit more flexible, you have movement, some physical movement as you're going on walks, and then you come back home and tunnel down for that activity. I think, at least for me too, those changes in physical space make such a difference in my ability to transition to a new type of task and tunnel into a new type of task. It's way too hard if I'm trying to maintain a level of productivity in the same space, in the same environment, with the same energy.
Yeah, a side note, just based on what Derek was saying about multitasking, there's a couple of things that I do. One of them is what I've heard termed as slow motion multitasking. So basically, if I get stuck or if I feel like I'm not productive on something that feels important, I'll just jump onto something completely unrelated and move that progress bar forward, right? And then come back fresh to the other thing. So I'm always using my best energy on something that feels like it's actually moving the needle, instead of grinding and really trying to beat your head against the wall on something that isn't moving the needle forward. And so having 2 or 3 things that you can work on that are significant, I think is good for me. Mm-hmm.
Which is maybe a little different than my neurotic nature, which is like something's taking too long to load and I'm opening another tab and starting another task and then going back to that task and then moving back to the other one. I'm not sure that's the most efficient, but I mean, I do a lot of things in a short period of time, going tab to tab as things are loading.
That's, faster multitasking.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up about kind of switching or giving yourself the opportunity to switch between tasks, because, as creative people, and I think everybody runs into the same thing, is that you do kind of hit against that wall. And I think, we've been told a lot that you just got to power through, right? Power through it and just keep going and that sort of stuff. But like, that's just going to cost you so much more in the long run. Like if you have 3 meaningful things to work on that you feel like when you do have that inspiration and that best ability to move that needle, allowing yourself to kind of switch between those is really important.
I go ahead.
I was just going to say, some jobs you don't necessarily have the luxury of switching to something else, right? You're grinding. And so I think sometimes what you're telling yourself in your head or what you're thinking about, the frame that you build for your work, can make it more enjoyable, because there's drudgery with every job, right? All of our jobs have things that we don't want to do that have to get done. And sometimes it's crunch time. It's like, okay, everybody stop the fun stuff. And now it's time to do the dishes, pick up the broom, and like whatever your grunt work is at your job. Grinding through that can also give you a sense of accomplishment. And you can, a lot of times, focus your mind on other things and be, again, it's kind of like multitasking. You can be productive thinking through things while you're doing something that you don't want to do, and it can create a positive experience. And so there's just kind of a weird trigger that... Yeah,
there's like a nuance there where it's like very, very brain-intensive tasks. For example, if I'm running up against something like that, I'll run into, a brain block, but then I'll like go sweep the floor, do menial chores that are not fun to do. And you're right, Mark, like that allows me to like use a different half of my brain that essentially like lets the creative side of my brain kind of cool down a little bit before I fire it back up.
It almost opens up space for it to develop naturally without the pressure. Like it makes space for your subconscious to kind of work through it too.
Definitely.
Very well put.
For me, I feel like I have so many different types of tasks that I do in my career that I actually don't block a normal work day. It's more like a work week for me. It's like on Mondays, I focused primarily on content writing, content editing, content planning. Tuesdays are all of my team-focused meetings. Wednesday are all of my consulting calls. Thursday are all of my digital media, video, podcast creation. And then Friday is kind of a grab bag. So that's not what I've done for a long period in my career. It took me a while to kind of start grouping tasks in a way that allowed me to not have to shift hats so much in one day, but to have space that this day is held for this type of activity. It probably took me a good 6 months to transition fully from ad hoc tasking to dedicated days for tasks, but that has made a huge difference for my productivity in my workday.
Does that give you the opportunity to reach a stopping point at the end of the day? Like
Maybe it does.
Like, you know what I mean? Where you don't feel like there's just this never ending, like you can always do more. That I think is beneficial from a number of ways. Like, these are the things I have to get done today, and when they're done, I'm done, is something that I strive for a lot. And I think subgrouping might be one of the keys to that.
With dedicated days for those things. So if it doesn't get done that Tuesday, it's not going to get done till the next Tuesday, and that just is what it is. Krista, what about you? Is there a normal workday style for you? What does that look like?
Well, I feel like I have an interesting balance to have to kind of maintain, because I do have this very strong internal kind of connection to things. Like, I want to dig very deep and, you know, relate to the environment and bring that all into my work. But then which I guess is kind of the more free flowing type thing. But then I also have a very strong conscientiousness and desire to meet deadlines and outward focus on other people and how can I, you know, make things good for other people. And so I think I have to make sure to leave room for the first, which I tend to get more into responsibility and these kind of putting outward pressures on myself. And I find that as a person, everything that I do kind of leads into the whole. And so when I make room for that kind of unstructured, like allowing my environment and just allowing things to, like we were talking about, gel subconsciously, then that just feeds and drives and gives like real meaning and purpose to the work that I'm doing. And that has been just a really important balance that I'm learning to kind of tread.
What's interesting as I'm hearing all of us talk is that we all have different styles. However, we all work together. So how do you take a team of creatives who all have different working styles and workday habits and make that work? How do you create chemistry around that so you actually create something great as a team without bumping up against each other's work styles? What has that been like for you, Mark, as you've kind of grown and molded a team? How do you make that work when everybody works differently?
Well, it's nuanced, and in my role, you know, I want to try to provide the resources and the direction for each person, kind of curated or catered towards what they need, and learn to respond and learn to speak in different ways to each individual person, and kind of foster a connection individually. And I don't know that I'm necessarily very good at that yet, but I feel like that's kind of the goal. In the workspace, I think it's very nuanced. I think the relationships are different between each person, each couple of people. And I think, I don't know if there is a way to really control that, right? Like, that's kind of what builds culture. And the way that Derek relates to Krista is different than the way, you know, Justin and I relate. And, you know, there's so many variables and so many connection points that I think what holds that together is the commonality of the vision and the purpose of why we're here doing what we're doing, because everybody is a different lens.
Yes,
and
I love that.
Yeah, and they see the world differently and add different kind of color or tint or shade to the whole. Like a mosaic is a term I use a lot. And so I don't know. I think there's something to be said for, you know, feeding it and letting it grow and not trying to micromanage it. I think that's the key that I have learned, especially with creatives. They do not like to be micromanaged. I don't think very many people like to be micromanaged, but some people do. But Yeah, as a business owner, I think one of the things you learn over, painful years is you got to let people grow, and you got to let people take things and own them and do what they're going to do. Even if it doesn't feel right to you, you kind of have to let that come to fruition. And so that's kind of my approach. Here's the direction. Here's a general direction, but now, like, for example, Krista, I need you to run, put your flavor and your tint and your view on this thing, but make sure it meets these 3 criteria.
And also, can you have it done in 36 hours?
Yeah.
Well, and I thrive on that. I love that.
Show me what you can do in 12, and then we'll meet again and see if we're on the right path so that we can do course corrections, knowing that this is due in 36 hours.
Yeah, I really thrive on that and love that. I think there's this kind of stereotype that artists, don't like deadlines. They don't like, but I think that when you apply all that you are and all that you have, and you also have these kind of walls or structures to bounce that off of, then that creates something really strong, and you're not floating in space and you're not contained in a box. You are a being interacting with the whole environment.
Well, I think that's so true. Whenever I'm coming up with a social media strategy, I love it when it starts to get layered, where it's like, okay, we have these campaigns, and I want these visual elements, and I want this frequency. And so all of a sudden these layers kind of build on top of each other to create this pressure cooker for great content. Like, the strategy has to come through when you put that much pressure on it, and I love that.
Deadlines are for pros, right? Like, nobody really enjoys the pressure, but that's what makes people good at what they do. You say, okay, this is my timeline. What is the best possible thing that I can contribute to given these parameters and these restrictions? If you don't have those things, I think that flexibility, I don't know, it leads to a laziness. It leads to a different type of a perspective where you're not putting enough pressure on yourself to really show what you're capable of.
Yeah.
And it doesn't show you your agility, and it doesn't show you your flexibility. Like, you don't learn to train those muscles. And when you have deadlines and when you have restrictions, it gives you an opportunity to fill the edges, right? To go of the box that you're in. You can go to the corners, and you can contribute knowing what those parameters are and pushing on them a little bit, going as far as you can. But without those, you're almost just like lost without direction.
It gives you too much. It's almost too much freedom, right? Within a creative box, because with any creative problem, there are a million ways you can approach it, right? And if you have an unlimited amount of time and you do not have that deadline, even if it's internal or arbitrary to some degree, you're gonna just meander, and you're not gonna get anywhere very quickly. You're gonna waste time. And you're not going to have a good product at the end, because you're just allowing yourself to be fractured across all these different ideas. And that's something that I've definitely learned over the years, is that not giving yourself, those parameters, that box, that channel to operate within can kind of come back to bite you in the butt.
It's expensive, and it's slow, and you don't have anything pushing against you to force your best out of you. This is why so many people want to do something. They say, I'm going to do this creative thing. I'm going to write this book. I'm going to do this thing. And then they don't do it because they don't have any, there's no responsibility. Like, there's nobody holding them accountable. Accountability is the word. And once you have that in place and you have to do it, then it's go time. And then you get to show what you're made of. And I think when you look at that through a really positive lens, it can be a strong tool for advancing your career or advancing, your utility as a professional or as a creative, or even just as a person, as a dad, you know what I mean? And so I've really come to kind of embrace that type of pressure and not necessarily look at it as a bad thing. Stuff still goes crazy, right? And chaos ensues, and people scream and all those different things, and it's wild. But that's what makes us better.
Yeah, don't you think working as a team like this, we run this balance line of accountability and grace. Like, we have to show grace to each other as a team of creatives, because in order for us to operate at our optimum level, we have to be a human being. like we have to be in our humanness in order to be great at our creative work, which means that we're not a cog. We can't operate exactly this way. We can't replicate what we're doing. We can't do it in exactly this amount of time. But we do have to have a sense of accountability. And so it's this balance between the two that I think is what makes a team of creatives work well together.
It's really well said.
Yeah, trust holds it together. So if one person's kind of waning and hurting the team, if the team can come around that person and bolster them, then there's so much trust that goes all the way around, and that person who's struggling builds confidence and is motivated and then can become stronger, and it helps the whole. And investing in each other is the way that I think we should frame that, right? Like all of us are a really good investment in each other as neighbors, as, you know, part of the society, is, you know, outside of business too.
Well, it's interesting having this discussion and just seeing how different everybody's work days, work weeks are like, and how that interacts with each other. I think we could probably bring 8 more people on the couch, and there would be 8 other totally different styles, and yet we still have to make it work together as a team toward a common goal. So it's interesting, the hill we climb in the creative industry all together, pushing each other down, spilling coffee on each other.
Yep.
Okay, well, if you enjoyed listening to this content and you want to hear more of it, you can subscribe, you can like our content here, you can leave us a review, but only if you liked it. If you didn't like us, just leave us alone. Why are you hanging out here? If you think you have better ideas than us about what we should be talking about, we would love to know that. orangenebula.com/topics. You can go in there. You can leave some community question ideas, some main topic ideas, some compliments. I would love some compliments. Maybe just put some compliments in there. I'd like it. But that's all. Okay. We appreciate you all so much for spending some time here with us. I appreciate you 3, and let's get the heck out of here.
We all just appreciate Krista. I think
Mostly that's
it's
what
really
it is.
what it is.
Aw.
We know that by now. Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.